Hey folks, Rich here. Normally you'd be with South Florida Beekeeping with Rich, but not today. Today you're with Richard Field Has Fun with Frames. Um, a number of people have commented on, oh, give me all the specs. I want to build one of your Poppleton hives. Please don't do that. That wasn't the point behind this experiment. Um, the point behind this experiment was to try out the asymmetrical frame, which was apparently used by Poppleton back in the day before Hoffman frame became the standard, literally before it had gained any kind of widespread acknowledgement or anything. And this was one of the things that had been developed early on with frames. Now, um, Langstroth's frame was nothing more than a straight top and straight sides with no shoulders that made for a frame 1 3/8 inches wide. Or no, I'm sorry, they weren't actually 1 3/8 inches. They were about 1 inch wide. And to space them, you physically spaced them. And people came up with things like putting little tacks in places, but all spacing was just physically done. You did it by judgment. And it wasn't, Hoffman is the one who came up with the idea of using shoulders so that you had 1 3/8 inches across here. So, like I said, I wanted to try this early frame style, which is 1 3/8 across here, but your bars go down one side, which allows you to, your comb presumably should be drawn across this sharp edge right here, which is why these wires are on the edge rather than in the middle, because this will be the center point of the comb and hopefully it'll go through there. To show you how well that works, well, here's one where indeed it did exactly what it was supposed to do. They drew off of this edge. Now, as it got near the edge, it drew off the other edge for some reason. And this happened 3 or 4 times. But I'm a foundation-less beekeeper, and this is what bees do all the time. You give them a regular frame with a regular bead on it, and they'll draw straight all through here, but at the two ends, they will tend to angle out some. This is perfectly normal. You see it all the time if you're a foundationless beekeeper. You take a knife, you make a horizontal cut right here, you make a vertical cut if it's attached to the side, you move it a little bit, you adjust it one time, and from then on your frame is just fine. Here is one of these frames that drew out a beautiful comb. All right, but as you can see, it again flared a little bit right here on the edge as opposed to the middle, but a beautiful comb. These frames do work. We have found that out. My experiment is so far very successful. But when people want to say, oh, I want to make one like yours, don't do that. Go with Layens. Poppleton started by taking more than 20 Langstroth frames and more than 20 new idea hives, which is what these are from, horizontal hives, and did a 2-year experiment with both of them. And at the end of that time, he resolved that he liked the new idea hive better rather than the Langstroth. And that's what he went forward with, building up quite a large bee business, first up in the Midwest and then down here in Florida. And he stuck with his new idea hive, which is what we would call a long frame hive, a long Langstroth top bar type hive, only with this type of frame. In Europe, Layens was doing the same thing himself. He was building a frame that used the Hoffman shoulder style, and this is the Layens frame, as you can buy them today. And you can buy them assembled or unassembled. You can get all the instructions you want on the specs for this gigantic frame right here. And you can buy that same frame as supers, and it's called the half size frame. Okay? These are lay-ins frames, your full size and your half size. And here is a lay-ins frame that has been cut to the size of the new idea frame, which was called the American frame. It was a 12 by 12 inch frame. Okay? So this gives you an idea. It's more than the half frame. It's less than the full frame. Of course, what I did here was to buy some unassembled lay-ins frames, and I cut it down to this size to see how this would work out. Because Poppleton said on many occasions that if he had it all to do over again, he would still stick with the new idea hive, which is the horizontal hive, but he would make it an inch or an inch and a half wider. Well, that's exactly what we have here. The American frame, which is what he used, was a 12-inch by 12-inch frame. And as you can see here, these frames are 13 inches. Just what he was talking about. He would probably go to 13 or maybe 13 and a fraction, maybe even 14. I mean, there's a lot of different interviews over a lot of different years. He said a number of things like that, but basically slightly wider, but keeping the same depth. Okay? And so if you want to do something along these lines, don't reinvent the wheel, or don't go back into archaeology and track the old wheel. Do something that's more modern. Do something where you can get all the specs for the boxes that you want from horizontalhives.com, the place where they manufacture everything for the lay-ins type hive. And if you choose, instead of doing the half frame, if you want to do the Poppleton type frame at this depth, well, that's fine. Let's look at the numbers. Let me flip that over so I can get the numbers there. All right. So a half frame, a lay-ins half frame, measuring strictly the area on the interior, because that's the only measurement that makes any difference, really, is 84 square inches of space in here. So it's 84 square inches times 2, because it's both sides, of course, but it's 84 square inches. A standard medium frame from Langstroth is 85 square inches. How about that? Yes, 85 square inches. So these two frames are equivalent. What am I? I'm an all-medium beekeeper. This is the only size frame I use in all my equipment. My brood box starts out in the spring as 2 of these deep, and a little later in the spring it's 3 of these deep. Then the queen excluder goes on, and the same size frame goes above the queen excluder. Everything is interchangeable, and they are the same as the lay-ins type frame for the supers. So if you wanted to build up a system where you use nothing but lay-ins, mediums, it would work out very much the same way. If, on the other hand, you wanted to build something along the lines of the Poppleton hive, I think that would really be a great idea. Okay, if you wanted to commit to all doing this size, or commit to this size for your brood box and do the smaller frame up here. I'm just not a fan of that particular thing, but that's 99.9% of the beekeepers in the United States. So,
and what are the numbers on that one?
The numbers on this one, this is 126 square inches for this frame. How does that compare to a deep Langstroth frame? A deep Langstroth frame is 136 square inches. 126, 136. Remember, the bees don't care. As long as you keep them dry and happy, they'll build on whatever size frame you have. 136, 126. I like how sturdy and heavy these are. I like the proportion of it. That's fine. But for this, 136, 126. Now, the full depth lay-ins, 174 square inches. I mean, that is a brood box. I don't care how you look at it. That's a brood box. Okay. But the problem is in South Florida, I started out with my deep hives being Langstroth deeps, and the bees would build them out, but very quickly the bees would move into the top half of the frame and leave the bottom half of the frame empty, and I had endless headaches with wax moths. I mean, literally, they would protect and guard the upper half of the deep frame, but they wouldn't guard the lower half of the deep frame, which is why I went to all medium frames. A lot of my medium boxes over here started out life as deep boxes. They all went on the table saw and got cut down, and that works for me. It worked out really well. I am very much a fan of shallow frames. The reason I wanted to do this is because Poppleton moved to South Florida, and Poppleton had great success with this frame size in South Florida. And I wanted to find out if there was something I was missing. If maybe making this narrower frame this way encouraged the bees to keep covering the whole frame, even though it was deeper. My conclusion is really not. I'm going to stick with my all medium Langstroth equipment because this is one of the few that has gotten drawn down almost all the way. Most of the frames in that Poppleton hive out there have been drawn down somewhere into this range. Now, I'm going to keep this hive going through next spring to see if next spring, when we're in that time of year when bees are prone to draw out comb, if they will draw it all the way down to the bottom and all these others. Hopefully it's going to work, but it may not work. And we're still going to have to find out later in the summer next year whether or not the bees do like they've done so often and they abandon the bottom half of this and I start having problems with wax moths. Because using my medium frames, I have no trouble with wax moths to speak of.
But we found wax moths in
We
the Poppleton hive already.
we examined the Poppleton hive the day that this frame was taken out because it's dry and clean and the bees weren't really covering it. We found several wax moths in there, something that rarely happens with my all medium hives. So from that standpoint, not too thrilled with it. So like I'm saying, don't do this. I mean, it was a great experiment. Could this design be applied to something more along Langstroth? It sure could, and these are a whole lot easier to make than a Langstroth frame. The concept of the asymmetrical frame is one that deserves more exploration. Probably won't happen in the United States. The other day we had a speaker from Germany at the Bee Club. He was visiting, and he gave me a link to a German catalog, beekeeping catalog, and I went through it, and they still use the Leyens Dedant hive extensively in Germany. And what the Leyens Dedant hive or frame is, Langstroth frame that is 3 inches deeper. It's also called the Langstroth Jumbo. Okay, 3 inches deeper. Also called the Langstroth Jumbo. I didn't do the numbers on that. Let's see what happens. If I get 17 inches by 11 inches, so 17 and 17, 7, 8, 187 square inches inside there. And this one is 174 square inches. Aha. So look at that. The last company that was still manufacturing Langstroth Jumbos was Miller, and they stopped doing it in like 2014. Nobody in the United States at the moment makes jumbos. Now, there have been a couple of companies who said they would do a run of them. It's not like I am researching this constantly or anything, but the jumbo frame, if you want to go with the concept of a deep brood box and just supers above that, which is what the Langstroth Jumbo was all about back in the day, that would be a great way to go too. Probably if you could get them at a reasonable price, less expensive than doing the lay-ins. The nice thing about lay-ins frames is they're easy to make yourself. You can make everything you need for lay-ins frames from pieces of 2x4 and a table saw, ripping them around. There's no fancy cuts. All you have to do is make a shoulder here and here, and everything else, I mean, and there's nothing that says you actually have to cut this down on the sides here, but you can, and you can do it quite easily. You don't need a special equipment for that. It's easily done. You can come up with a technique for it. They're sturdy. They're easy to build. I studied lay-ins frames when I wanted to build these, and it was the techniques that are used here that I used to build these. So yeah, lay-ins frames are easy to build, and a Langstroth frame built with these kind of construction methods to make a deeper one, that would also work just fine. So don't sit there and think, oh, we have to do it this way. Nah, you can do it any which way you want. And as long as you got a table saw, it's not too hard to do. I'm going to show you. This is just something fun I did years ago, and I dug it out to show you for this. Okay. I wanted to know, well, what happens if I want to make a narrower frame than a standard Langstroth? And I did it by taking a regular Langstroth top bar, cutting a chunk out of the middle of it. See the line across there? Cutting a chunk out of the middle, cutting a chunk like this, butting those two pieces together. And these two strips are a paint stirrer that's been ripped in half, and they happen to be perfect to put on the shoulders here. So you now have a 1 3/8 inch, that is a full width. These would butt to butt on here, perfectly strong, okay? Perfectly strong. And this one just happens to use a deep. If you wanted to make it more out into here for whatever reason, you could just glue a piece to the inside here, extend that on down into here and up. Always to the inside, never to the outside. But you could just tack on another piece. You'd lose a very few cells in doing so, but you could make yourself a frame any size you wanted to explore. And again, you could use a full width Langstroth frame, a deep, presumably, and you could get the heavy duty stirring sticks and extend down and make yourself your own Langstroth jumbos if you can't find a source for them and you wanted to do something where you had that super deep hive body. I just don't find here in South Florida that it works that well. The bees don't tend to cover it well. They tend to stay in the top half. But a little bit of fun with frames gets you thinking a little bit outside of the Langstroth box. Okay? There you go. This is a Fun with Frames. This has been Rich with Richard Fields Fun with Frames, otherwise known as South Florida Beekeeping with Rich. Be sure to like and subscribe, and everybody have a great day.